It's okay.
Okay. So on the corner here at Indiana and 37th, Cornelius Coffey is this gentleman here, and John Robinson. They were auto mechanics that wanted to step up into aviation, but they couldn't get anyone to teach them how to fly or do anything with an airplane. So they decided they were going to build their own airplane. They built an airplane called the Heath Parasol. It was a kit plane that you could purchase, and the company was located here in Chicago. And it used a motorcycle engine that was from a Henderson motorcycle. It was a single place plane, and a lot of people taught themselves how to fly with that plane. So they thought they'd do the same. And they built the plane, but they got it all done. They even put it in the Dreamland Cafe. It was a jazz club in 1929 Christmas. That's where Cab Calloway got his start.
Okay.
So they even put it in there to get the people in the neighborhood excited about it. But the only thing they had issues with was where did they fly it out of now that they built it? And that was the problem. Now, they worked in Elmwood Park at a Chevrolet dealership. And near their dealer was an airport, and that airport was selling an airplane. So they went to that airport and they asked, if we buy this plane, will you allow us to fly it out of this airport? So they said, okay, if you buy the plane, you can fly it out of here. And from that, they built a relation with the pilots at that airport, the white pilots, because they found out that they had built their own plane, that they were auto technicians, and they needed help building their own plane that they were designing. So they became good friends. So they kind of integrated themselves into the white pilot community here in Chicago. But they were trained auto mechanics, and they went to schools like Robinson went to Tuskegee to learn his trade. Coffey learned at a very good school here in Chicago. So they wanted to do the same with aviation. They wanted to go to an official school and get their license from an accredited school. So they found out that on Michigan Avenue, between 13th and 14th, South Michigan Avenue, Curtiss Wright, which was the major manufacturer of aircraft at that time, had a school that they were opening, and it was called the Curtiss Wright Aeronautical University. So they sent their money in, and in September when they showed up, they told them that they were wanting to give their money back because they were African American and they didn't want trouble in the school, and they gave them all these excuses. Well, they told them, we don't want our money back. We want to learn the trade, and we want to get the license from your school. So they left the school, and they told the person that they worked for, a German immigrant named Irmo Mack. They told him the story, and Irmo Mack said, well, if they don't let you in the school, we're going to get the best lawyer in Illinois. We'll sue the school, and you open your own school. So with the threat of this suit, the school doing investigating and finding out that they were already involved in aviation, they let him in the school.
Oh, wow.
Okay, but they didn't realize how well they were going to do. They graduated top of their class. And they did so well at the school, and the school was so impressed with them, they told them, listen, why don't you stay on as assistant teachers, and you can go into your community, that was Bronzeville at the time, and today as well, and you get 20 or 30 students together, and we'll start a class for African Americans. And that's what happened. Now, when they went into the neighborhood looking for students, a lot of women started being interested, and that's because of Bessie Coleman. She was the first African American to be a licensed pilot. So she inspired, at that time she was the only known licensed pilot. There's other stories now that we know more about the history, but everybody knew her as the first licensed pilot, and she inspired the people from Chicago.
Do you have a picture of her here?
Yeah, that's her right here.
Oh, okay.
And this is Bessie, and this is Robert Abbott of the Chicago Defender, and he helped her finance her trip and supported her. And the Defender also became a great supporter of the aviators that came after. Okay? So they formed this group, and this is the class here. This is basically the initial students from the school. Now, not only did they learn to be technicians, they wanted to learn how to fly. Now, the airport that Coffey and Robinson were flying out of got subdivided. Okay? So as suburbs grew, even back in the 30s,
okay.
they lost that airport. So now they had all these students that wanted to fly, but they didn't have an airport. And they had the plane that they had wasn't really good enough to teach the kids how to fly. So this student up there is Janet Harmon Bragg, who was a nurse. She had saved the $600 they needed for this airplane. So she bought the plane for them, but they still needed an airport. So they went to the town of Robbins, Illinois, which is the south suburb of Chicago. Now it's incorporated.
Okay.
But at that time, they had their all the officials were African American. The mayor was African American, the police chief, all the officials. So they figured, let's go to Robbins, ask them if they give us a piece of land, and we'll start our own airport. So that's what they did. This is the airport here in 1933 in Robbins, Illinois. So they got a piece of land, they knocked down trees, they buried boulders, they built a hangar, and they all taught each other how to fly. Now, this is the early 30s. I have to remember this is the Depression era. From when they started school in 29 to 33 when they got this class going. It's Depression all the way through.
Right.
But they were working, going to school, learning how to fly, building airports,
buying planes.
Buying airplanes. So you can see what determination.
Yeah.
Right? So now they're trying to figure out how do we get into the industry. Now Robinson had an idea. He had graduated in 23 at Tuskegee as an auto technician. It was his 10th year reunion. So he figured, let's fly a plane from Chicago to Tuskegee Institute and convince them to get aviation. Since all the white universities like Purdue, they were getting aviation, why not offer it to Tuskegee since they already had taught this class, they had the background, so they figured out they were going to take them with open arms. But instead they said it was too advanced for the race at the time, and they turned them away.
Wow.
34. But that didn't discourage them. They always were looking for the next thing. They heard that the king of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, wanted to start an air force because Italy had already invaded neighboring Somalia, and Ethiopia was one of the only African nations not to be colonized. They had their own king, and the king decided he needed to defend himself with an air force because Italy had an air force. So he's looking for technicians. So Robinson contacts the embassy here in New York. They tell the king, and the king says, if one of you proves themselves, then the rest of you can come over. So he goes over, he proves himself to the king. Italy invades Ethiopia while he's there. So he's the only pilot in the Air Force, and he's flying their plane from the front lines with wounded soldiers while the Italian Air Force is up in the air. Right? But he manages to survive. But Ethiopia was, colonized, for a short period by the Italians, and the king was exiled to England. Well, England took him in, and Robinson came back to Chicago. This is him arriving at Midway Airport, which back then was called Municipal Airport, and he's being greeted by the people from his group here in Chicago. They had a parade for him down Archer Avenue, and then on South Park, which is now King Drive, 18,000 people greeted him.
Wow,
Really?
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Including some of the, the upper echelon of the society from the neighborhood, like Mrs. Malone, who was a beauty products company owner. Her school was called the Poirot Beauty College, and she was a millionaire. Okay, no problem. She was a millionaire, one of the first African American women millionaires. And
what year was this?
This is 34,
Okay.
35. And so she took a liking to Robinson, and she gave him a coach house behind one of her mansions to start an aviation school. She also bought an airplane for the school and herself, so they could fly her to all her different branches around the country. So they started barnstorming the South, Coffee and Robinson, with 2 planes. And so they went to Alabama, the Mississippi, the whole South, convincing young African Americans to come up to Chicago to go to their school. Okay, so that was an adventure in itself, and there's many stories, interesting stories about their adventures, barn story. But they had a successful school, but now we're getting towards the end of the 30s, and the government decided that we didn't have enough pilots in America if we were going to possibly wind up going to the war. So they created a program called the Civilian Pilot Training Program. It had to be civilian because we weren't at war yet. But it was a way to build a pilot pool. Their school, being African American, qualified, but they knew they were going to be excluded. So what they did is they organized. They formed, now the Chicago Defender comes in again. Enoch P. Waters, this gentleman here, from the Chicago Defender, had been covering the story about these aviators, and he helped them form an organization called the National Airmen's Association of America. And what that was supposed to do is figure out how many African American pilots were out there in the United States, and get that information along with the information from their school, and convince our officials in Washington not to exclude them from this program. So what they did is they got armed with that information and the connections of the Defender with the officials in Washington. They flew a plane from Chicago to Washington. So this is Chauncey Spencer and Dale White. This is Horace Clayton, and this is a representative of the Jones brothers. So these are the two young men that flew there. This is their teacher, Coffee. This is an African-American professor of sociology at the University of Chicago, and he helped co-author The Black Metropolis, the book The Black Metropolis. So he was interested in seeing what was this activity.
Right.
Now the Jones brothers, they had $500 to make the flight back and forth, but the two young men with the organization of Willa, who was organizing all of this. Now Willa was a pilot, a mechanic, and she had a master's degree at Northwestern University in commerce, which is now called business. So she had a master's degree in business administration in the mid-30s. Okay, so she organized everything. She was the person in the school to organize this whole adventure to get our government to change their minds. So the Jones brothers were gangsters. They ran the policy. But if you had a good idea, you could go visit them and they might help you out. And they gave them $1,000 on top of the $500 that they had. So they had plenty of money to do everything that they needed to do. And that's what they did. So they got to Washington, they met their officials. They even met Harry S. Truman, who was a senator at the time. And he was from Missouri, senator from Missouri, the Show Me State. He went out to look at their plane. So he looked at their plane, saw it, took one look at it and said, if you guys had the guts to fly from Chicago to DC in this plane, I have the guts to see you get what you want, right? So between him and the other senators and congressmen and Willa's work, she also was contacting Mrs. Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, and writing letters to her. They were able to get this, and she wrote the language to the act, and it specifically said that it would not exclude African Americans from participating. So they were able to participate. Now, they told the other universities, but the universities hadn't taught anyone how to fly, the African American universities, like Howard, Tuskegee, Hampton, all these historic colleges. So the school that the government really put the emphasis on was the school here in Chicago. Now, they expected them just to teach people how to fly, but this program had 4 phases. It had the basic flight training, the advanced flight training, which was aerobatics and maneuvers, cross-country navigation, and instructor, where you could produce instructors to teach other students. So they were able to get all 4. So our government was not ready for that, right? And not only that, because they had, like I said before, integrated themselves into the white flying community in Chicago. Many white students were going to their school. So not only did they get all the programs, they were instructing white students.
Wow.
Okay. Now, the person that allowed from the government that was overseeing that was Lieutenant Noel Parrish from Glenview, Army Air Corps station, right?
Do you have any documentation on that I could give this gentleman?
Oh,
Point?
no, I don't. But
Okay, hey, I own a main store. Is there anything on here that I need to contact you guys? Or?
yeah, I can give you my. If you stop, I can give you my number.
Okay, I live right around the corner. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hey, how long you guys been here?
All right.
Oh, we'll be here.
Okay. All right. So, Noel Parrish was overseeing their program, and I call him Coffee's best student. He's a white lieutenant, and Coffee and Willa really got him into this whole thing, right? And he gave him all the possibilities to do it all. Right? So Tuskegee gets the military to open their facility in Alabama. Was really supposed to open here.
Why didn't it happen here?
Well, because they're teaching. Look at the class, the makeup of the class. Okay.
Okay.
All right. They're teaching 10% of their 20% of their students are either female or white.
Okay.
So it's really too far ahead of their time.
I see.
And they were always pushing for integration. So when they got not the teaching, now they wanted, if the units were formed, they wanted it to be integrated. So they were vocal about it, right? So they didn't, really, they were not going with the flow.
Okay.
They were kind of, being a little aggressive. But that's how they got
Progressive.
it. Progressive and aggressive.
Right.
So, and they maintained that throughout the whole war, because in the end, they had an equivalent program to Tuskegee. So Tuskegee and the Coffee School of Aeronautics had all the phases of training, right? And they trained 500 pilots here in Chicago, of which 20% were white and women, right? So that's the really important part of the story. So it didn't stop them from training people. They were doing the same thing, but only in. Now, there's several ways that they supported the program in Tuskegee. One, when Tuskegee needed their first instructors, where did they come from?
Chicago,
Here,
right.
The number two, Lewis Jackson, was Coffee's partner in starting the school here, and he became the number two there.
Okay.
Chief Anderson, Alfred Anderson, who was the number one at Tuskegee, came to Chicago to train for his advanced course and to pick up this high-powered plane that they had bought for him to train the advanced course. But he failed his first test, and Robinson, who was the colonel from Ethiopia, he asked him why, because he was staying with him, because Tuskegee sent him up here. They said, stay with Robinson while you're up in Chicago. And he had told Robinson that he was in the front seat of the plane, in a tandem seat plane, doing this test, and normally the students in the back, the instructors in the front. So Robinson said, go back to your plane, do the same maneuver from the back seat and see if you can do it right. And it wound up that he could do it, was the plane was rigged improperly from the front seat, and that instructor might have known that. Okay, so he went back, did the test from the rear seat, and he passed. So the main instructor that Tuskegee had hired on their own passed the test because of Robinson. The second in command in Tuskegee, Lewis Jackson, was Coffee's instructor. Okay, and then the early instructors all came from here.
Wow.
Okay, so, and then another thing happened. This gentleman, Chauncey Spencer, who had flown to DC, the Roosevelt administration, FDR, had made it unlawful to discriminate in federal employment.
Okay.
So now the largest air base in the United States was Wright-Patterson, and they were having technicians there and doing flight training, and they needed to integrate the base. So they tapped Chauncey Spencer to help with the integration of the base. Now he's the son of a poet, Anne Spencer, who was a famous African-American poet that wrote. She was part of the Harlem Renaissance, although she never lived in Harlem. She lived in West Virginia, Lynchburg, and she wrote poetry about her garden. But every notable person in Harlem that came through always stayed at her home, and they all read her books.
Okay.
So she's a very important person. And this was her son who came to Chicago to learn. Now he's in charge of integrating Wright-Patterson Air Base. Now, when they got the program running in Tuskegee, they sent white officers from the north to run the program, but they were conforming with the South, okay? And the program was not going well. So they sent Chauncey like on a mission to figure out what was going on there. So he posed as a technician at the base at Tuskegee, and he made a summary that it was not going to work with the officials that they were sending down there. So who did they tap? Coffee's best student, Noel Parrish.
Okay.
So they sent Noel Parrish down to Tuskegee, and that's when the program in Tuskegee started to work.
Okay, take off.
So that's another reason, another Chicago in Alabama making the program work there.
Noel Parrish was white, correct?
He was white. He became a general because of the success of what he had accomplished. But he started with getting coffee, his program here.
Wow.
And there's a lot of cooperation between white pilots and from Chicago and Coffee and his group. When Coffee needed to start the program, he had a 40 horsepower Piper Cub. You needed a 50 horsepower Piper Cub. And one of his white students offered to finance that plane for him. Okay, so the first plane that he had was a 50 horsepower Cub financed by one of his white students. And then when they needed to get the high powered planes, which were at that time they cost $7,000 each. It was a lot of money back then. They didn't have the money to buy those planes. But the school where they had started, right, in Chicago, it now was owned not by Curtis Wright, but the instructors at the school, who had formed a long relation with them. And when they needed these high-powered planes, they got them for them. Okay. So they had this network created here, and nobody realized this when they, So that's why it was so successful. It was a network of people from the community of all colors, supporting it, patronizing it, and that's really the beautiful part of the story. And now, after the war, the programs migrated into the public schools, and they built a new school, Dunbar Vocational High School. And when they built that school, they had aviation as a course in mind, and they built a large hangar on the southeast corner of the school, and they had an aviation program that Mr. Coffee ran for 50 years. Well, he ran it till the 70s, but he was actively involved until his death in 1994. Like when students would graduate, he was a designated examiner, and he would give them their oral practical exam. So after you take the written exam, you need to take an oral practical under a mechanic that's licensed to do that, and he was licensed to do that, and he gave their licenses to them till his 91st birthday in 1990. In fact, my partner at American Airlines, because I used to be a technician there, Mr. Coffee got him, gave him his license.
Wow.
So even people that I worked with generations later were affected by this.
That's pretty amazing.
So it's a really beautiful Chicago story, and what I'm trying to do now is remind people of the history and how important this neighborhood was to aviation, desegregation, integration, and also how important having these programs in the schools is. So I'm trying to get them to start the AMP program, which is Airframe and Power Plant Technician. It's an FAA license that you can come out of high school with. It's worth 30 college credits. You can get a job at an airline with it. You know, there's a high demand for that right now. And so I'm trying to get that back in the schools, because that's my profession. I'm a commercially rated pilot, but I'm also an aircraft technician.
And what's your name?
Umberto Rico.
Umberto Rico.
So that's what I'm doing here, is telling people the story and trying to promote this program at Dunbar that we're trying to start.
Is there anything we could do to help promote your story or your mission?
Well, if you know, just if you talk to any officials, aldermen or things like that, you could mention that Dunbar wants to get this back in the school. And then Dunbar has a parent council that's very active. And there's a little office in the front of the school, and they're always actively involved in helping me and trying to help me get the program back in the school.
Okay, Albert.
So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, very good. This is a wonderful story.
It was a long story.
No, it was worth it.
Very well, succinct, and
So you understood it?
oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
And it got me excited. I mean, it made me more
Yeah.
excited about living in Bronzeville than ever.
Oh yeah, I mean, for aviation, well, for so many things, you know, for music, for the arts, but you normally would think that, you know, because we know all the artists, but we don't all know the technical
Yes.
side,
Yeah,
you know,
correct.
and how important it was, you know, for things to come.
Yeah, part of American history. I mean, it's a major factor in some of the things that happen in American history.
Right.
So,
And in fact, hi, how you doing? Truman, I think it was, he signed 9981, which was the presidential act to desegregate the military. So, and he met these guys, you know, and he's the one that backed them for and then he saw the results. So I think that influenced him when he signed that, and that's a huge thing, because once you do something like desegregate the military, the whole thing is gonna unravel.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly.
And I actually have this plane that he's under. This is a Piper Tripacer, 1953, that he bought new, and he kept it until his death in '94. And this then went to his best friend, who was Marsalis Foos, who was a white kid in 1930. He was a 20-year-old motorcycle racer, okay, and technician for Indian motorcycles. And he became friends with Coffee. Coffee used to drive a Henderson motorcycle when he was a kid. They were 10 years of difference. So the kid wanted to learn aviation, so he recommended the school on Michigan Avenue. So he got involved there. Then after he got his license, Coffee had started this program at the Harlem Airport, Harlem in '87. And that's where they did their flight training. And he got him to help him. And this kid started his own business, which became one of the most famous aircraft supply companies in Chicago, B&F Aircraft Supply, right? And they were lifelong friends. So when Coffee died, he was 91, and this guy was 81. He bought his plane. Then he got his planes, and he started deciding, well, we need to put these planes in museums, right? So there was a museum in the mid-90s that opened at the Chinook Air Base.
Where's that?
It's in Rantoul, Illinois, near Champaign. And this air base closed down, and they made a museum. And he made an exhibit called Barnstormers and Entrepreneurs. And Coffee was a barnstormer and an entrepreneur, and he was an entrepreneur, right? So they were the early aviators of Illinois. That's Barnstormers and Entrepreneurs of Illinois. So they had this exhibit for many years, but the museum closed. And these 4 planes were ready to be scrapped. And a guy bought them, was ready to sell them for parts. But then when I found out that Mr. Coffee's plane was there, I had to get it, right? And I really got it for next to nothing, because they were being parted out, right? And so this Marsalis Foos collection is part of, very important part of the history. So then I asked Dunbar if they would let me restore the planes at the school to help promote this idea of getting aviation. And they agreed to that, and they gave me the space to put the planes.
How long ago was that?
That was about 2-3 months ago.
Oh, wow, okay.
It's recent. So thanks. So I have those planes there, and then I go around with the smallest one that's easy for me to drag around, and I do this kind of thing. Now there's another very important thing. The plane that was in the basement of Wendell Phillips High School, now there's only 2 of these airplanes left in the world. this model.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Boeing P-12 E-type. There's one in Chino, California, and one at Wright-Patterson Air Force Museum.
Oh, okay.
And who donated it to him? Marcellus Fuss, Coffey's friend. So it's my suspicion that that plane
is that
this one.
Picture.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. And a dream of mine would be this: if I get this school going, if we got that plane, we could open a museum around it and tell this whole story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so those are my ambitions.
Right.
But I'm not sure yet. But this looks like an E-type, and there's only 2 of those. And that plane and Boeing is part of Chicago now.
Right.
And that plane is what saved Boeing during the Depression.
Really?
Yeah, this is a military plane that they designed with their own money. Because Curtis Wright, the owner of the school that Coffey went to, they were the major manufacturer of aircraft between the wars.
Oh, okay.
Glenn Curtis and the Wright brothers, they formed the company. And so Boeing could not compete on the military planes, but they built this plane, and it was very successful. And it kind of made the company.
Wow. Okay. And they don't even have a.
No.
Wow.
They don't eat. They're in Chicago. They don't know this history.
Wow.
And I talk to a lot of people that are scholars and historians. They don't know the story. Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of a hidden story.
So have you documented the story? Like.
Well, this is my thing that I do.
Okay.
Right. And so now I'm gonna once a week I have some people film me. Right?
Okay.
So
Good.
I'm trying to put something together.
Okay,
but that's
good.
not my main thing, but I'm trying to preserve the story.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
But I think talking to you guys, you'll talk to people.
Yes.
It's sort of like going to a museum out in the street, right? Because museums, you gotta want to go there, and you gotta want to, But this way, somebody that's not really into this might, suddenly take an interest. Right? So that's the idea.
Okay. Well, we do know the alderman, so we'll put in a good word for you.
Okay,
and
okay.
yeah,
Absolutely. Which one is it?
Pat
Dow. Yeah. I talked to her many years ago, but now because I've been brewing all of this in my head for a long time. But last year, I actually got the ability to do it.
Okay. Wow.
If somebody don't mind, can I take a picture next to you?
Yeah.